Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first in a series of 8 webinars for the 2023 Community Summer Challenge. FundAccess has teamed up with the Barbados Entrepreneurship Foundation to spearhead this activity. The aim is to expose youth to team-based practical initiatives to encourage the uptake of micro-enterprise from idea to startup within 12 months. The primary target audience are individuals who are 18 to 30 years of age, who have a business, or those who are seeking to develop one. Our first webinar, entitled The Concept of Mental Health, will be presented by Dr. Saralyn Bryce. Dr. Bryce is a general psychiatrist with 30 years experience, with her work extending across a wide spectrum of areas. Dr. Bryce attained her graduate degree in medicine from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus in 1991 and subsequently attained her doctorate degree in psychiatry also from the University of the West Indies in 1997. Following her studies, Dr. Bryce worked in a male forensic mental health lockup, has assisted on sites of mass casualty incidents and disaster situations, in addition to working in shelters for battered women. She also worked extensively with persons suffering from various developmental disorders in schools, churches, and organizations. Dr. Bryce has been an expert witness in the judicial system and has also dedicated significant time and effort to working on street corners to assist the young and homeless. She has authored the insights into the concept of stress management in disasters, and the Stress Management in Disasters Training Manual for the Pan American Health Organization. Dr. Bryce also authored the Mental Health Policy of Barbados, followed by a series of evaluative mental health tools for use in a myriad of clinical settings. Please join me in listening to the webinar entitled The Concept of Mental Health.
So we are looking today at the concept of mental health. And that brings a problem with it. Health. What is health? Defining health is not easy because built into any definition of wellness is going to be subjectivity. My well is not necessarily your well. And that subjectivity of the concept has to a great degree limited the work of mental health professionals. But health was defined in 1948 by the World Health Organization as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of infirmity. And mental health in 1995 was defined by a guy called Disjarlis as not simply the absence of detectable mental disease, but a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own activities, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to contribute to his or her community. In other words, it goes beyond the rubric of health as just the absence of illness. And if you learn nothing more from this presentation, that's what I want you to learn. That because you don't have an illness does not mean that you have good health. Poor health can be present without illness. So, what are the facets of mental health? And these are the facets, according to yours truly: optimal self-development, subjective well-being, adaptive social skills, efficient role fulfillment, productive living, and healthy social interactions. All of those go to make up a healthy human being. Now, at any point in time, some aspect of that can go awry. And that is when you get mental health problems. So what are mental health problems? They're the kinds of problems that occur when you don't have enough criteria to meet a mental health disorder, but you're not happy. You're not working productively. You're having a lot of symptoms to deal with. And these problems can include problems with your environment, they can include housing problems, your job, finances, education, healthcare, problems with the law, etc. So, because you don't have a disorder, does not mean that you don't have a mental health challenge or poor mental health. And the difficulties with defining the extent of that comes about because actually there are no psychiatric illnesses, none, that you have a marker, say in your blood or an x-ray that you can do to say, yes, you have 1 millimeter of this or 1 gram of that. No, they're behavioral syndromes. We have to observe the person. We have to hear about them. We have to hear about what they've been doing. And after that, you get diagnoses of mental disorders, mental illnesses, which are based on a collective set of criteria put together by various specialists in the field. One of the best known and actually a personal colleague of mine is Professor Michael First. Michael First has done the diagnostic criteria for the American Psychiatric Association and now for the World Health Organization for a number of years. And it is where an individual and group of individuals come together to say, well, look, if you have these things together, we are going to call it this. But that's not a blood test. And it's what has given psychiatrists the difficulties, actually, in having the public have faith in our diagnoses because they can't see, feel, and touch them. As far as they're concerned, he just bad behave. No, he isn't bad behave, he's ill. Now, based on these diagnostic criteria, World Health Report 2001, the World Health Organization looked at the major psychiatric disorders, which are the anxiety disorders, the mood disorders, the substance-related disorders, and the psychotic disorders. And they looked at them and looked at the lifetime prevalence for adults and for children. And unfortunately, for any mental health disorder at all, any one of them, 1/3 of all children and adults have one. So if you meet 3 people, trust me, 1 out of every 3 people you meet have some psychiatric disorder. And that has nothing to do with whether they have mental health problems as well. Because you can have major depression and still have financial problems. So you have 2 issues to deal with. And what are the markers of poor mental health in a person? Well, poor mental health unfortunately can lead to poor physical health. The two, we have this artificial separation between them, and it's unreal because one can cause the other. But the biggest one to me of poor mental health is poor self-concept. Too many of us struggle with not accepting who we are. We fight to be somebody else. Our nose too flat, our hair too woolly, our skin too dark. I mean, gosh, man, we are just not happy with who we are. And it doesn't have much to do with if you have money or not, because there are a lot of rich people who are not happy with who they are. One of the biggest things I think that we can do to improve our mental health generally is to get comfortable with who we are. strengths and weaknesses alike. You look at yourself and you find, well, I'm not as short as I wanted to be. I'm not as thin as I wanted to be. But you know what? This is me. Whatever. Move on with it. I remember when I was going to school growing up in a vicious school system. It's only now I look back and I think that children are really harsh to each other. But I remember kids would say to me, about my big head or my fat body or whatever. I used to laugh because anytime they call me fatty or big head or big foot, any of them things, because those were three characteristics I had. And they came to me, I was always good at maths. That was my gift. If you come to ask me to help you in maths, you know that my big head can remember. So people learn not to call me that crap because often they needed help with maths. So you gotta learn to accept what your strengths are and use them for your benefit and not go around crying to be somebody else, because you won't be somebody else. Irrational thinking. A lot of us think so irrationally, man. We get up, we see somebody have a private jet, and you know what? We are suddenly living our lives to have our own private jet. For what? Where you want to go? What I mean? So you can travel once a year, but for that once a year, you want your own jet, right? Irrational thinking. Maladaptive social and interpersonal skills, and it's getting worse now with the era of phones and internet and this very stuff that we are doing. You know how often it is that two people will sit next to each other and communicate via phone? It is really very, very scary. I don't know. You could just turn to the person and say, well, what you prefer for lunch? But you WhatsApp it instead. It's interesting. Failure to exhibit goal-directed behavior. A lot of us don't make plans. We don't have goals. We just get up one day to the next and we live. And then we wonder, well, why is life not going right? We can't deal with conflict. Our way of dealing with conflict is exhibiting aggression. But that don't help. We can't communicate and we take some of the strangest risks. And then you have organizational markers of poor mental health. If you have an organization and you're senior in it, you're part of the management, and your staff, your workforce ain't producing and is often absent from work, you have poor organizational health. Take a bigger look at your organization. There is a major problem. And then communities. I often hear people of higher place, complaining that there's so much crime and violence around and so much substance misuse. Well, buddy, the problem is that the community ain't well. It has poor community mental health. What is at the basis of that? Is there an equitable distribution of resources? Is the community accountable? Are people made to feel like individuals first and important contributors to society? Well, if they're not, look to fix the community, man. Building more prisons ain't gonna help. And more drug squads ain't gonna help the drugs either. So, what are the possible impacts of poor mental health on people? Well, they tend to feel distressed. There increased risk for morbidity and mortality. And I didn't actually write it here because I find that suicidal behavior is contagious. So I tend not to write the word suicide in my presentations, but people can become so overwhelmed that they take their own lives. poor self care, impaired self sufficiency, impaired role fulfillment. You know, you have a lot of parents now having kids and not looking after them. Why? Well, it's because they themselves are struggling. It's not they don't like the kids or they don't want to look after the kids, but they're having problems. Impaired language function. Have you ever been in a fish market where people get really upset about who got which or what? Have you ever heard the language that follows? It's really decorative. And that's just because of the stress. And that's what people resort to when they're stressed. Impaired social relationships. A big problem for this country, I think, actually is for the world, is we are not spending enough time just having fun. And fun isn't walking up and drinking a lot of rum and causing problems. No. Fun is sometimes just going on a path that you've never been on before. Take a sheet, throw it down, lie down, look up, look at the trees around you, admire the animals across the pasture. Just relaxing and getting one with nature. Or you may be with a group of people and you're doing things to have fun. Even Barbados used to be a place where May Day, I know May Day was a big one. You would have picnics where families went out together, ate together. Groups from the same village went to the same place, so they shared stuff. Uh, cricket. Cricket was something boys came home to play outside in the road. You know, life to me was just so much more fun, but we have taken fun out of living. Stigmatization, discrimination, and victimization. All of those things tend to come with places that have poor mental health. If you want an example, and I'm sorry, they put themselves out as an example, go on the news any time of day, I don't care which, and take in 15 minutes of American news, and you will see those three words at their best. So, is that society healthy? No, no, it's not healthy at all. I don't care how much money it has, it is not a healthy society. Because all of that results in social isolation and indignity. And what is the impact of poor mental health on families? Well, you know, we can have economic difficulties, problems with providing health care for the family, cost of supporting affected persons with mental health problems, the cost of supporting the dependents, the stress of coping with the disturbed behavior, restrictions of social activities, emotional reactions to the illness, a diminished quality of life for the other family members, and the same stigmatization, discrimination, and victimization with social isolation and indignity. And finally, what is the impact on a country? Well, poor mental health, I think, is more costly than a lot of the physical health problems that we identify. And it brings healthcare costs, social service costs, lost employment, lost productivity, the cost of dealing with crime and public safety, the negative impact of premature mortality, and accident related costs. Poor mental health is very, very costly. But we spend the most of our focus. I'm sure if you pick any child over about 5 or 6, they can tell you about diabetes and hypertension. But they can't tell you anything about poor mental health. And to me, that's a failing on our society. And let me say to you personally that any one of us may be affected. It is no respect of persons. Doesn't care about your age, your sex. your socioeconomic status. No, I've treated people from all walks of life. My youngest patient was maybe about 4, and my oldest was 99. So, no, it doesn't respect the things that we look at. So, how would you cope with poor mental health? Well, the first thing about coping with something is to acknowledge that it exists. And we deal with poor mental health by using denial. We deny the existence. So that does not help anyone. You have to acknowledge the existence and then try and gain understanding into, well, what is this? Why is it happening? Where did it come from? How can it be dealt with? So you have to acknowledge, you have to gain understanding. But long before you're challenged with it, you have to build resilience. You have to make sure that you are a resilient individual. Apart from diet and exercise, there are lots of other things that you need to do to be a more resilient, that's the only word I can use, resilient person, and be able to withstand change, because part of life is change. And finally, you need to work with the reality. You see, if you wanted it to happen or if you didn't want it to happen, it has happened. So do not waste your time dealing with what you wanted to happen. Deal with what has happened and how you can move forward. If you do that, then you spend less time wasting in worry and more time working towards productivity, producing, getting it done, moving from this bad place. Because the bad place can't be there forever. And once it is moving to a better place, you need to be ready to move with it.
Thank you, Dr. Bryce, for your informative session. And everyone, please remember to avoid stress, build resilience, and take control. Do have a wonderful day.